Good evening, Bill.
Good evening, Sandy. How are you?
I'm fine. This is take two this evening already. I've already had my funny 5 minutes before we started. But Bill, it is a delight as always to see you, and I shall now inquire, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. It is absolutely beautiful here in New York City right now. It's 65 degrees and sunny all the time for the last few days. So it's
Lovely.
it's the spring weather that everyone talks about, the reason why you live in New York for.
Do you find that people's mood just generally is lifted?
Oh, immediately. It's
Mm.
like night and day. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think here in the UK, the weather has been very cold the past few days, but it's been beautifully sunny. And everybody seems to be perhaps coming out of their COVID haze a little bit.
Do you guys use the word crisp to describe that kind of weather? Where it's
Sometimes, yeah.
cold, dry, and sunny, it's crisp outside.
Yeah, but it definitely does lift the spirits, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anyway, this evening, speaking of seeing, narrative and not. Um, we've spoken before about stories. In fact, one of our previous presentations was called Story Time. Um, but tonight, really, I'm filling my boots because the people we're going to talk about are some of my favorites. So, Lynne Cohen, talent search. Now, Bill, I think you're not so familiar with Lynne Cohen's work.
True.
Um, but she's someone who has really, really inspired me in the work I make as a photographer. And possibly, if anyone has seen my work ever, they would see the immediate connection. I like photographing empty interior spaces, and Lynne Cohen definitely is one of the key figures, really, in a kind of conceptual art, minimalist driven way of photographing interiors that is quite unlike all the kind of glossy photographs we might find or encounter that would be classed as architectural photography on places like Instagram. Anyway, this is called Talent Search. It's from the late 70s. Cohen was born in the States. She grew up in Wisconsin, I think, and she then moved and became Canadian later in her life. Sadly, she passed away in 2014. Um, but she had this extraordinary relationship to space, and really, I think that's born out of her experiences training to become a sculptor. She trained as a sculptor primarily at art college. Anyway, I don't know what you think when you see this.
It's funny. This kind of hits in a lot of ways. If the only times that I ever shoot architecture, and it's just when I happen to have a camera and see something I really like, I don't ever go out and do it actively. Um, I'm looking at the two lights in the upper left and the upper right hand corner,
Mm,
and how they're, mirror symmetrical to each other,
mm,
and how she's pretty close to right down the dead center with that light in the middle.
yeah.
Um, I'm one of those people who, when it comes to stuff like this, like if you're going to get anywhere close to geometrical symmetry or lines being parallel or things being straight on, I want it to be perfect, you
Mm.
know? Um, I will tell you, and this is completely just me being me, the fact that the chairs blend in with the white semicircle back there,
Yep.
that really makes me uncomfortable.
Okay. Well, can I just ask though, does it make
Yeah.
you feel uncomfortable because of your very particular and fastidious nature when taking photographs about, kind of spatial elements and things like that? Or is it making you feel uncomfortable because there's something else to it?
Uh, I would lean towards the first.
Hmm.
You mean something towards the subject, the fact that it's an arrangement of whatever, 15 chairs or whatever, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering about well, I have the title, don't I? Narrative and not. The story this kind of photograph, or indeed just this photograph, might speak to us about. Is there something about its nature that makes you feel uncomfortable anyway?
Uh, it's interesting that you like empty spaces. Is there a reason why you like them? I'll answer your question, but I just want to know, like, what is it about this kind of place that does turn you on? Like, is it the fact that people were there, or that people are going to go there, or the stories that came through there? Like, what is it that you're thinking about when you see it?
It's not enough to say that it's quiet, but I really like the fact that it's very quiet often. I do like the idea of pregnant spaces. And in fact, Lynne Cohen is well documented talking about her work. She gave a lot of interviews in her lifetime, and she was also a very well-known and well-regarded teacher who spoke frequently about her own and others' work. And yes, this idea, this notion of pregnant spaces, like something has happened to get it to the point where we find it, but equally there's something perhaps that could happen. And I like the suggestion of those things where you're not being hammered over the head. And where also there's room, I suppose, for projection. And this links maybe to when you and I have talked in the past about painting, why I so enjoy looking at color field painting or abstract expressionisms, because maybe I'm just extraordinarily selfish or vain or something, but I like finding my own stories in these things. You know, things are hugely...
Wait, hold on a second. Your own story is in your own story, or stories that your creativity is creating that is based upon what you're seeing?
Stories that I'm creating.
Got it. Okay.
Within the image. So those kinds of things, really, I really love them. And things things to me that are too descriptive, I very much appreciate their skill, especially in painting. But often I want a bit of wiggle room. Yeah. Anyway, come back to the question. You were asked a question, Bill. I don't know if this is a deflection.
No, it's not. I just, I understand the, did you say quietness? What was the word you used? Stillness? What did you just say? Quiet. I understand that notion of, it's almost like it's a breath being held, you know? It's like a moment, but a moment that's lasting longer than a moment should. I can see interpreting or seeing this and feeling that way. For me, a lot of times I see work like this as just an empty room. I don't see the before and after. I don't see what's going to come or what has been there and have that be part of the singular image. If I'm looking at an image like this, I would generally lean less towards a narrative interpretation and more towards a pure graphical interpretation of it, you know? But it's funny because you sent me a link to a book the other day. Yep. And, you know, and I made a snarky thing back because I don't read fiction. I never read fiction. I haven't read a fiction book in 20 years. And it's just interesting. It's like that because it just doesn't fiction just generally doesn't interest me. So it's interesting just the way our two brains work to that end. But I can totally appreciate it from a graphic point of view without ever getting into the narrative interpretation of it. Okay, so you know that I do love having my notebook with me. Yes, I know. Really? You have a notebook with you? Because by the way, let me ask you one question. What color do you think that wall really is? Beige. Do you put colors on all of this? No. No. Interesting. Okay. It's kind of like you know, it's like stepping into a movie all the time, but the movie is real life. And it doesn't matter if it's in Technicolor or if it's in black and white. The fact is the story's there. And I love color photography, as you know, and there's color images coming up, and indeed Lynne Cohen photographed in color as well. But and also often Lynne Cohen's color work does look like it is black and white because the spaces she's photographing in are often monochromatic. Yeah, so there's a whole play on our perception.
about whether we're building stories or reducing things down to things that are no longer about story or even about the past or about present. We're going to look at Candida Höfer in a minute as well, but I just want to read from my notebook.
Go ahead, sorry.
She was interviewed by Canadian Art Magazine. Anyway, she'd given an earlier interview to the magazine, and then she came back and was speaking, I think in about 2007 maybe, and she was saying that her work is loaded with storytelling, and she'd said that before. But even if you know the work is still always incredibly complicated, so even if you know it's a story, it's more complicated even than the story you create. And why does it have to make sense? This is her speaking. The images are pieces of a narrative puzzle that could be about anything. It's totally absurd. Absurd, but it does tell a story, so the work goes back and forth. It is narrative and it isn't. And actually her connection there, making the connection herself between what she's photographing and this idea of it being absurd. In another interview she gave, she talked about, you know, there's almost like a Duchampian moment in what she creates, because we're not sure if we're meant to find a story, or as you described, this idea that you can appreciate the image purely for its visual elements. You and I,
but at the same time, she is giving it a title.
She is. I mean, she, again, not always. Often things are untitled, but then in brackets she'll put something.
Yeah, well,
in fact, I suspect this originally would have been untitled, and then in brackets talent search.
I have my own bias, which is towards when people are making art that they see or project or want to discuss or explain as ambiguous because they want the viewer's interpretation to be a big part of it. To me, I have to fight a desire to yell cop out. It's just like, if your job as an artist is to communicate with me what it is you're trying to communicate. If you're communicating ambiguity, you didn't do your job. Like to me, that it's like you're okay. Then I just made some really it's a white wall. It's like it could be anything you want it to be. Well, yeah, okay.
Well, of course,
that was a white piece of paper.
I love all work about white walls, Bill, as I'm sure you can imagine.
I know.
No, I do, because unlike you, I see that there is so much potential for there to be an inclusivity somehow between what is a viewer, what is art, what is the maker of the art, what is the participation element, what is the formation of an experience through not actually experiencing, but yet through our kind of matrix of memory and indeed our own experience, bringing it to what we see. And so when we encounter something that is ambiguous, perhaps we really are given an opportunity there. And I don't think it's a cop-out. I think it's a generosity.
Yeah, see, this is fine. I mean, you and I can differ on this. I just, but if you're at that point, then every moment of everything you see in your entire life is an ambiguous moment that can be interpreted 4 trillion ways, which is true. Then, yeah. Okay, well then, why do I need this ambiguous art when my reality is ambiguity anyway? Like, well, I could be doing all of that.
Hang on. If you like representational art, the entire world is represented as well. So really your argument falls flat on its face, Bill Wadman. Come on now.
It's funny because I do like a lot of, like the abstract expressionist stuff. I like that stuff, but I like it from a purely graphical point of view. I don't enjoy interpreting it.
But there we go again, this is about, she's saying herself, does it have to make sense?
Well, she's saying she wants to play it both ways. She wants to both say, I'm saying something, but what you're interpreting might not be what I'm trying to say, and that's okay. But the fact that you're even trying to interpret it is okay. And the thing that I'm trying to say is kind of irrelevant anyway, because it's just one of a billion different, like, isn't that kind of what she's getting at?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was reading the other day about Bernardo.
By the way, I like the red. The color in this one really does add something to me.
Okay.
And this one totally feeds my parallel lines fetish. But go ahead.
Bertolucci, that's what I was talking about. Bernardo Bertolucci, the esteemed Italian director. There was a wonderful series of quotes I was reading the other day that he had said, and he was getting really cheesed off, I think, with people trying to interpret his work. However, he did say something along the lines of, you know, I'm not in the business of making messages. I'm not in the business of delivering messages. That's the business of the post.
So what is he in the business of?
Making something of beauty that is in and of itself, perhaps. I mean,
okay, here's my question though. Like, if you, in Lynne Cohen's case, she's photographing what are otherwise sort of banal moments of normality, right? Like this is, you know, at a hotel lobby or whatever it is, like a sofa against the wall. Mm. So what she's photographing, and even the way she's framing it and stuff, there's nothing particularly artistic about the choices she's making from a technical point of view. So if the subject is not particularly, like, you know, different, and the way she's shooting isn't particularly different, then what is Lynne Cohen adding to the equation of me happening to be in this hotel and looking to my left and seeing this shot? The fact that she's putting a frame around it, which is a reasonable answer. I just,
no, I mean, I think, you know, there are lots of references here. Again, this is about what you and I might know because we know it. Like, I know that Lynne Cohen studied sculpture, for example.
Right.
I also know that she was hugely influenced, and indeed references frequently notions that would otherwise crop up in the paintings of people like Agnes Martin. So she's looking at minimalism and conceptual art, but she's also actually very interested in pop art. And this idea that something that is banal does become elevated through the simple observation of it, or the kind of capture of it. And in our case as photographers, you know, the capture of the freezing of a moment that's otherwise standing still and is probably discarded and, as you say, banal, is highly relevant in that it is still something that is at once an object or objective in this case, and in many cases she photographs chairs.
Sure.
They are ordinary, yet they are so loaded. They're loaded with a language that is about our culture. And I say our culture, I'm talking really about a culture in which we will have perhaps seen things very like this firsthand or glimpsed them. You know, if anybody watching has grown up in an urban environment, maybe, or has ever been on holiday anywhere in the 70s, 80s, or early 90s, you know, you may well have encountered, you know, scenes like this, waiting rooms, lobbies, hotels, you know, as you say.
Wait, go back for just 1 second. Is there also something, and this is not to put him up on a pedestal, but there is something like Eggleston-esque about this, like the color and everything about this, isn't there? Or is that just me?
I think there are maybe
commonalities between them.
Someone like Stephen Shore, actually.
Oh yeah, that too. Yeah. But like that sort of late 60s, early 70s color work where stuff is very just what's in front of the lens kind of thing, you know?
Yes, but I think the reason why I go to Shore rather than Eggleston is that I think there's a specific attention paid that is not perhaps so candid in her work. Like Eggleston's work is often actually quite candid.
Yeah.
Whereas this to me is not.
Okay. Yeah. I'll go there with you.
Shore, I think, is perhaps maybe getting shot down in flames about this, but Shore's work often could be considered perhaps more considered in its inception.
Yes, I like Eggleston's work better than Shore's, but yes.
So do I, but nonetheless, I see greater parity between.
Do you think, you know, I think we brought this up before as sort of a litmus test for images, the whole idea of, you know, if you put these two images in a pile of images from snapshots from people's phones, would you pull them out? Do you think you'd pull these out?
I would. I would, yeah, I would.
Yeah. You think you'd be able to recognize it, though, then as being elevated above your average snapshot?
Yes, but this is also about one's own, again, come back to this idea about one's own narrative. I'm not putting Sandi Robertson into the image and saying Sandi Robertson sits on those chairs.
You should. You'd look cool sitting on the one on the left.
You could go on the other one and we could still have a chat, right? But I am putting myself in the image because I want to understand it, and I do understand it. And so...
Wait, do you understand the image, you're saying?
Yeah. But again, I don't think Lynne Cohen needs me to, because I could still appreciate it visually, purely visually. But actually, I'm telling myself stories about this photograph.
What? Give me an example of one of the stories you would tell yourself about this photograph.
Well, I mean, it's a bit kind of David Lynch, isn't it? You know, I definitely have Laura Palmer making an appearance through that door.
Okay. So you see it as something of a movie set?
Oh, yes. Or there's something so off with it as well. It's fascinating.
Yeah. But they're not, the stories you tell are not themselves sort of banal in the way that we would discuss it, in the sense that you would never just imagine some maintenance guy coming out of that door rolling a mop. It would always be something.
I would, but also I don't. This is, again, I think about how people read anything that happens or anything that is. Perhaps the maintenance man rolling the mop is of itself brilliant. There's something about it that's just brilliant. You know, I think we're so obsessed, actually, with things having to be shiny and a particular way for them to be meaningful or indeed even powerful.
Well, interestingly enough to me, you know, I mean, you know, I mentioned the guy rolling a mop. If I was in this location, I might take that picture and actually put somebody in a suit rolling a mop. You know what I mean? As like, but I always want to add people to my pictures just because I'm a people picture person.
Yeah.
But like, to me, that would add a thing that would make this special as opposed to an empty TV set.
Well, I think there's
why not choose to tell one of those stories in particular, I guess is my question. There's still interpretation in that. You know what I mean? Like, you and I could interpret. You and I could interpret the guy with the mop 1,000 different ways.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to.
Why do we need to even get to that point?
Because as it is, I don't know that this gives me enough information to like make the set of possible stories small enough that it actually means anything to me.
Do you know the other thing I find?
By the way, I like these images. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to, you know, poop on them or anything like that. They're great, but like, I'm trying to tease out the way you're looking at them. Go ahead. Sorry.
I love how I'm chucking like Bertolucci at you and, you know, quotes, and you're like, I'm trying not to poop on it.
American.
Oh my God. Anyway, the thing I was going to say about Cohen's work that I really like, and I like it in contrast to Hofer's work, Candida Höfer, who we're just about to look at, is that Cohen's work, to me, again, this idea of like having a pregnant space, something in which things potentially can happen. But I get very much more the sense with her that things have happened and they're in the past already.
In Lynne's work.
So these, pardon?
In Lynne's work?
Yeah. So in these photographs, I very much get the sense that something has been and it's now gone. Whereas when I look at Hofer's work, I see something that is expectant.
Okay. Interestingly enough, I would think expectant on the first set too.
Okay.
I would look at this image and think that it was the inside of a brochure about this concert hall?
Mm. Well, Hofer is really, I mean, Candida, Hofer and Lynne Cohen, I would love to know, if anybody knows this, could you put it in the comments for me? But I don't know if they ever met each other.
Is there a big age difference between them?
No, they're exactly the same age. Unfortunately,
Okay.
as I said, Cohen passed away in 2014. She had lung cancer.
Yep.
Hofer is still alive, and she's still making work. And you know, there are so many things that, in one way, really unite them, but in another way, they're so totally different. And that in itself really interests me, because both these photographers, for me, have been profoundly affecting and inspirational. And though I've described Cohen's work, and this is a quote from her, this idea of pregnant space, you know, actually pregnant space for me is about Hofer's work. Now, Hofer, like Cohen, was very well educated in a kind of art vernacular, a language that would be about an art history or his art historical context. And there's lots of debate really about how, well, not debate, but just conversation about how Hofer's work challenges both art concept, but also kind of the art theoretical element of what we see. You know, there's something visual, yes, but there's also something challenging theoretically about Hofer's work. I'm yet to kind of discover a way in which we can, for many viewers, I talked to quite a lot of students about Hofer's work and Cohen's work actually, but I talk about Hofer also just generally because I find that lots of people who aren't keen on looking at photographs unless they're of people still quite like Candida Hofer's work. Whereas not everybody likes Cohen's work that I show. They find it so boring. Whereas with Hofer's work, what's interesting is normally the scene, the landscape within the image is much grander. That's an immediate thing. And this is an unusual image to show, actually. I think it's because I was looking at the red.
I can imagine in some ways that, well, all of these would lend themselves to larger prints.
Yeah, well, they are. I mean, you know, these are like 2 meter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Prints.
Yeah, especially, yeah, the Hofer one is asking to be a large print. Yeah.
Yeah, but so are these. So
yep, yeah, no, I can see that.
But both artists are working in these really large scale formats, outcome formats. So their prints are huge. The quality is amazing. Hofer is a technical wizard. But I always think of her work as creating a space in which something is absolutely going to happen. And the recording of these interior spaces is really about, I suppose, showing us, it's like somebody showing you a photograph of like the underbelly of humanity through some kind of documentary or photo story. This is like the underbelly of a humanity that people don't care to even bother about. It's not that it's salacious or that it's difficult. It's just that it's actually, again, perhaps banal, but there are also other elements within this. And visually, I mean, Hofer really has a kind of appreciation, I guess we'll see in a minute with some other photographs of hers. It's almost like an awareness of Renaissance or classical painting values. A lot of the work is kind of like a Raphael painting to me. I'll show you evidence of that in a minute. But
yep.
What I do find interesting is when Hofer comes out of her grand scale and comes back into a smaller space, if I could find a greater parity between she and Cohen. I don't know if you could comment on that.
You're saying when Hofer shoots in smaller spaces, you see more of a commonality? Is that what you said?
No, I wondered if I would.
Oh, okay, but you don't?
Well, there are superficial likenesses, but there are still things that sort of still, you know, they separate them. Again, just, you know, to think about this.
There's much more negative space, or much less negative space in Hofer's work. I mean, this one, there's a big giant white thing in the middle, but like as a general rule, Lynne kept, there's a lot more area around what she's doing that is just sort of blank. You know what I mean? In a positive way.
I mean, Hofer has
it's a negative in a positive way.
Hofer has a really prestigious art education behind her. She trained under Berndt and Hille Becker at the Dusseldorf School.
Yeah, we know how you feel about them. You love those guys, don't you? Didn't we discuss doing a typology show at one time?
I do typology a lot with classes at school.
Yeah, okay.
Mainly because it forces your eye.
You know, I keep thinking, I keep looking at this picture. Sorry, I'm looking up a painting. This reminds me of
Hammershoy?
The Erno Feeney portrait, you know, the Van Eyck thing. It feels like it's the same sort of perspective as sort of like this is a room where some Renaissance thing is in the foreground and this is the room behind it. You know, there's something very, does that make sense?
It does, but it's interesting because I tend, like, Hofer is referenced frequently as kind of being sort of cinematic in her scope.
Yeah.
Whereas actually I find that, and by the way, I love Candida Hofer's work. There's no question. She's one of the most important photographers, I think, working today.
I sense a butt coming.
But I do get a stronger cinematic sense of sensibility from Cohen's work. And I think perhaps that's to do, you've kind of identified this sense of space. In Cohen's work, there's an element of being present. Whereas with Hofer's work, there's a cool detachment, there's a coldness. And so it becomes harder for me to be in it. Whereas, much as I said earlier, I don't put myself on the chairs, although now forever I shall see Bill Wadman and Sandi Robertson sitting.
We have to Photoshop that in there. Somebody, one of our viewers has to Photoshop that in there. But go ahead.
But with this, I don't find myself in the space. And I have to say, from a personal experience, sharing something about these photographs, the Höfer photographs. Last year, just before lockdown, I was really lucky enough to travel with my student to Cambridge University, a student who had participated in a public speaking competition called Articulation that's run here in the UK and other places, but mainly in the UK, and public speaking about art. And so I travelled with my student for the final, and it was being held at Clare College at Cambridge University, which is, of course, a very prestigious place in itself. And before the presentations in which my student was going to kind of perform, people were broken up into smaller groups, and they were given a choice of things they wanted to go and visit. And you could go and visit Kettle's Yard, or you could go and see, you know, other things around a wider campus setting. And there was a tour that was going to Newnham College, which is traditionally the Ladies' College of Cambridge. And well, I couldn't miss it. And anyway, when I was there, I've heard about the library there, as well as obviously the big library at Cambridge University. But I found making photographs that are actually very similar in outcome to these kinds of things. It was a very interesting process for me, because I do photograph interiors a lot, but very much more a kind of closer proximity to the objects that catch my attention. A shorter distance usually between me and, for example, the end surface.
Wait,
so
go forward for a second. Just go forward, and then one more. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, keep saying what you're saying. Go ahead.
So at Newnham College, there was an opportunity for me to photograph empty dining halls and also the library. And there were these very long tunnel-like spaces that I could look into and photograph. And funnily enough, even photographing, looking through my viewfinder, I found myself feeling entirely separate to the space, which I've not really had before photographing. Anyway, that's really an aside. But when I look at these, there's definitely a cold detachment. They are highly academic photographs. Not just because of their technical excellence. I suspect that, you know, Höfer wants us to view these things. And unlike Cohen's work, which is again this idea of almost like a pop art elevation. This is about recording something that is already great frequently. I mean, this is the image that I return to.
You know, do you see those? They're also, not to play into stereotypes, but Hofer, I'm assuming, is Swiss or German of some kind of persuasion.
Yep.
You know, there's also all of that element in there
persuasion,
too.
Bill?
Well, you know what I'm saying. There also is a structure in just sort of the thought and the way people are taught that way, you know. I mean, this one in particular is just, actually the last one too, they're extremely geometric.
Yeah.
To the point where they're on the edge of being studies even more than, you know, it's like playing an etude versus playing a song. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm going to record this in such a way that it,
you know, do they tell you a story?
No, but I find them very satisfying.
Yeah.
But again, as I said earlier, I don't like stories. So it's okay that it doesn't tell me a story.
I find it interesting though that by and large, Hofer's work contains a lot more kind of what I think of as content. And yet it has less story in it.
Okay, you're putting me in a corner where I'm going to say something that's going to agree with you, and
excellent. I love it when this happens.
I'd like to preface this by saying I in no way agree with you because I'm just saying this.
Bill is like, Bill wants to just tell everybody that though he is in fact going to agree with me about something, he's trying to pretend he doesn't actually. But he does. Go on then, spill it.
You could say that Hofer doesn't leave any space for the viewer to add their own element into what it is that they're looking at.
Right.
So therefore, it is harder for a viewer to engage with it in a way where they are telling a story, because it's sort of, there's no visual room in it for you to add yourself or to add your story pieces.
I love that you're agreeing with me there. But I would also like to say that there are lots of other people, highly scholarly people, who've written about Hofer's work, who liken it.
Disagree with us fervently?
Well, they liken it, I've written it down, imitating Christian transcendence. You know, often, I mean, Hofer's going into Western institutions of greatness often. She's going into vast theatre spaces, which are kind of the crucible of culture. She's going to libraries. She's going to really grand and opulent halls and, you know, spectacular places, really, that architecturally are already grand, beautiful.
Yeah, they're ready to wear.
Yeah, they are. And I suppose there's an element of, are we quite complacent? You know, if you're studying at Trinity, are you in there like, and again, this is maybe something from my own experience in Newnham College, but I mean, the library is quite small, but I very much had this photograph in my mind when I was making some of the images. It's like, if you're studying in these places, or if you're frequenting the opera, or if you're going to the places where there are these beautiful edifices and institutions, do you really notice them?
No. I mean, listen, I go to the Met all the time, and the architecture of the Met, let alone the art that's in it, you just kind of walk through and you're like missing these beautiful archways and, you know, columns.
But you will do this, and I do this as well, Bill, and this is where I think we probably are very similar, is that you and I do give time to noticing.
Yeah, I try to. There also, I think, you know, what you were just saying, though, about the fact that Höfer is going and photographing these grand spaces. That probably, like, my initial comment on the shot in the concert hall, where I said it feels like it's from an architectural shot from a brochure.
Yeah, but
because, say again?
Does it feel like a shot from an architectural brochure now? Does it have
Yes.
does it have an element of the timeless to it?
Yeah, but sort of leaning on your point, because she is shooting these things that are sort of, as we said, ready to wear, it does become far more about architectural photography versus shooting a space. I think that those are kind of two different things. Hofer's work feels more like she is shooting that space as it is, and I'm not here to add anything to it. I'm just here to make a very critical photograph of that.
Interestingly, Hofer does a lot of research. You know, you can listen to her speaking about spending a lot of time. You know, she doesn't create these photographs in that. She doesn't create the space, of course.
Yep.
But she invests a lot of energy in finding these spaces.
Sure.
And then once she's found somewhere she thinks will be suitable for what she wants, again, without ever perhaps really putting a finger on what she wants, the fact is that she does a lot of research about the locations she then shoots, and she meets people who frequent those places, and she speaks to people about the kind of anecdotes and stories that they might have about these places. And I've always found that also to be of enormous value in looking at her work, because though I don't feel like there's space for my story,
yeah,
I'm aware that there are many stories
in that space.
Yeah.
But at the same time, does she present those stories along with the photographs?
Well, then
it's just what she talks about if you ask her about it.
Yeah, maybe there is an element again about what you know and information leading.
I mean, in some ways, you know, I will have conversations with the people that I photograph, and when I look at them, I remember those conversations, and I can say, you know, Sandi was thinking about the story she was telling me about being on the beach when she was 15 when this photograph was taken, or what have you. No one else will know that, but maybe it does imbue something in my photograph of you, the fact that that story was being told at that moment, in the same way that, you know, it means something if she talked to the librarian, maybe the librarian of the place, the guy who runs the place, or the woman who's like the architectural, you know, conservator of this place, could be standing next to her, talking to her while she's setting this picture up. And so that moment means something to Höfer because she was having that conversation. Would it make a difference if this photograph was presented next to a transcription or a recording of the conversation she was having with the woman when she was taking it? You know what I mean? Just like sort of turn it into almost like a mixed media, multimedia piece, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I just do think, though, that in terms of story, there being a narrative or not, and not, to match our title, we're looking at two photographers who have huge amounts of crossover and yet are so incredibly different. And I love that, because both of them, as I've said, are hugely influential personally for me as a photographer and artist. But it's also about this idea that one brings us spaces that are banal and makes them endlessly fascinating simply through recording. And
I would love to have both of these women in the same space and said, you each have 2 hours to make 5 photographs.
Wouldn't it be amazing? I mean, I feel really, I feel so sad that Lynne Cohen is no longer with us. And it's purely selfish for me, because I would love to have met her and talked to her about her work in some small way. You know, you've asked me ages ago about heroes. And I think Lynne Cohen is probably one of my greatest heroes.
Top on your list?
Coming close. And isn't it funny? Sometimes we don't know why people are special to us, especially people that we don't know personally.
Yeah.
But that we maybe get to know through what they do, or people watching this will think, oh, it's crazy. She just takes photographs of chairs in empty rooms. How's she a hero? But, you know, again, it's this idea of kindness or generosity and what one brings into the world for other people to enjoy, appreciate, and to not just pique interest, but to give us space for reflection, space for appreciation of something. Anyway, the last photograph.
Would one of your goals be to be one of the busts in the last picture? Would that ever be one of your goals? Like I'm the third person on the right.
Oh, I know. Not only are we here. Hello, Bill. Hello, Sandi.
Yeah.
We could be both of us busts.
Okay. We'd obviously be looking at each other.
Shouting. Arguing.
I'd be explaining how you're a sentimentalist and, you know, all wrong all the time. And
you'd be explaining it to me. Is that because
you'd be saying that you'd be saying I have no heart and that, you know.
And here you don't, because you're a marble statue. Anyway, last photograph.
Got it.
I picked this one because, again, it's like a contraction and an expansion. So Cohen, I think you put your finger on it earlier, this idea that we're quite, it's a closed space, that obviously Hofer is looking at much grander spaces, even when she is in closer proximity to what she shoots in and shooting in a smaller physical space. There's still that sense of air, I think.
Isn't it interesting? Hold on. Can you go back to that one for 1 second? Isn't it interesting that you could crop this? Let's say, you know, you were Cohen. You could crop this to crop out the window on the left and the whole white ceiling and wood at the top, and just make it the green with the white with the green wall on the right with a desk, and it would be much more like a Lynne Cohen photograph.
It would, and also actually, I haven't put them in this presentation, but Cohen does shoot green quite a lot.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, just if anyone's interested, I do urge people, you know, that this is not like the is that
yeah, that's totally
of what these artists and photographers have got to offer us.
Hold on a second. Are you telling me that 3 images from each of them is not the entirety of their body of work?
Well, we've just been talking about complacency and how some people aren't perhaps as curious.
It's true.
And
although, you know what? I think a lot of times, you know, that's a conversation for another time, is exactly that idea where if we had to choose 5 images to, you know, explain Avedon or 5 paintings to explain Monet, like, could you do that in such a way that it would encompass an artist's thing in a handful of images? Like, is that possible?
Funnily enough, you know, I was thinking about people who crop up for us quite a lot. You and I tend to, Van Gogh crops up quite a lot for us.
Sure.
I don't know if you've realized that.
I think that's common for, isn't he a common person to bring up just in general? He's
a common person to be of himself and to be widely discussed. But you and I seem to shoehorn him in quite a lot of places.
All right, well.
And I wonder, actually, we've possibly given an overview of Van Gogh. Not entirely, but we've maybe had a good stab at it with across many presentations, him featuring here and there.
Have we had the potato eaters anywhere in any of these images?
No, but we had the miners' wives.
Oh, yeah, that's similar.
So although we haven't looked at lots of his paintings,
yeah,
we have encountered him, and we've then returned to him just more anecdotally in conversation.
Yeah.
Anyway, I wanted to finish on this one because sometimes Cohen latterly did come out into a greater kind of airiness, I suppose.
But at the same time, there's the negative space of the ceiling and the floor.
Yeah, so there's still this incredible compression. And, you know, so even when she is managing to shoehorn in a chandelier, I'm still getting that forlorn feeling of quiet, yes, abandoned a little, but definitely things in the past, not things for the future, not the grand plan. Hofer's work is the grand plan for the future. Cohen's work is the lament.
Looking at Cohen's work just makes me want to take pictures like Cohen, even though I don't take this kind of work.
Well,
it makes me want to get out a large format camera, or, you know, at least a medium format Fuji or something.
Listen, I live in Bournemouth, and there are so many, with all due respect, there are so many rundown hotels here in Bournemouth.
Yeah, things like this, yeah.
And, you know, it could be like your weekly yoga class could take you to a space just like this.
Do you bring cameras to your weekly yoga class?
I have done before.
I quite like this image. I think there's something about the silver of the ceiling, you know. It's interesting when you said the comment about how even when she's shooting in color, a lot of times it feels very monochromatic.
Yeah.
Probably because she's using like less saturated films, plus they're less saturated places.
Yeah.
One of the funny things that it always reminds me of is there's a, you know, the great majority of pictures taken on the moon by the Apollo astronauts were in color, but the moon is so gray that you think that they're black and white until you happen to notice, you know, a patch on one of the guy's arms and it's, you know, the American flag or whatever. And you're like, oh no, that's a color photograph. It's just that everything is just so gray. It's very similar to this where, you know, the crystals in the chandelier and just the like peach of the walls is the only thing that makes it not black and white, you know?
But, you know, this is like saying that, like I like quiet because then it allows noise to emerge. And it's the same with this, you know, the reading of gray. The reading of gray allows everything else to kind of come out.
But isn't it interesting that I didn't see it as gray, I saw it as silver? Making some distinction of the reflectivity of it, I guess.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like this one, but I think I like the second image of hers best. Mostly because you and I are sitting having a conversation in it.
So we will finish on this one then. And Bill Wadman, I shall turn to you and I shall say, thank you very much, Bill Wadman, for joining me this evening. And you shall say...
You're very welcome, Sandi. This was a lot of fun.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.